Right. So welcome everybody to the Sustainability Interest Group at Cal EPA. Very excited to have our two guests today. This Sustainability Interest Group at Cal EPA is a group that it's people at Cal EPA, mostly staff members, but we're open to other people looking to be sustainable in our own lives as we help to maintain or improve the environment for Californians and their lives. Uh, and today we're going to be talking about Fair Oaks EcoHousing. And we have two guests, Marty Maskall and Katie McCammant. Uh, and so I want to start with introducing Marty Maskall. She is the founding resident of the Fair Oaks EcoHousing development. She is a retired web designer, author, and publisher. And Marty, you tried to get a co-housing development going in Orangevale and Folsom, and partly through the Great Recession and with some neighborhood opposition. And I want to talk more about that. But first, I also want to introduce Katie McCammant. And Katie, when I look at your bio, it's almost like you have practically lived co-housing your whole life. It seems like you got an architecture degree from UC Berkeley, completed your master's, your graduate program studies at the home of co-housing in Copenhagen, Denmark, which started in the 60s. And so then you co-authored the definitive book on co-housing that helped to bring the idea of co-housing to the United States in the 1980s. And helped develop a co-housing development in Emeryville and lived there for 12 years. And now you're in Nevada City for, I don't know how long, but helped to develop basically the founding resident developer of that community. So, and you're developing dozens of co-housing developments throughout the world, I guess, or at least especially Northern California. You have a great resume for this. I'm really excited to have you both to talk to our group. And we of course have a focus on sustainability. So I'm interested in how co-housing just inherently is sustainable. But let me hand it off to you, Katie. And I know you have a presentation that could take about half of the time we have. But then I want to save some time for Q&A afterwards. So thanks everybody for coming, and let me hand it off to Katie. So thanks again for coming. Oh, you're muted, Katie.
There. Can you see me and hear me? Or see the presentation and hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. Pleasure to be here. And if there's a co-housing community you've heard about, it is quite likely that I was involved. So I really think of co-housing as both an environmentally and socially sustainable option. And as was mentioned, I have been involved in co-housing most of my adult life. So I started as an architect, found there was a real need to sort of act more as a developer, ended up acting as a developer, got kind of beat up during the Great Recession, but it basically played pretty much every role there is to play in co-housing, including living there. And so both Marty and I live in communities. And there is now more and more being written about co-housing, but these were the books that really introduced it. There was actually an earlier version of Creating Co-Housing, which was really the book that introduced it to the English-speaking world. So that's part of my claim to fame, is being part of the partnership that introduced this idea. But I'm much more excited actually about actually building projects. And that's what I have spent most of my life doing. So what is co-housing? Well, I think of it, it's really like an old-fashioned neighborhood. I grew up in a neighborhood where neighbors knew each other. As kids, we were running in and out of each other's houses. When I got to having my own kid, it was like, wow, where is that neighborhood? It's really hard to find. So when I ran across co-housing, it just made sense to me of like, oh, we still have our own private homes, but by working together in a collaborative way and the community facilities, we really can work together as a neighborhood in a way that is it more adapted for our contemporary lifestyles where we are no longer living in the neighborhood with the aunt down the street and grandma around the corner where people have lived for decades. So this photo is actually where I live in Nevada City co-housing up in Nevada City. So it is, there we go. And I think really the basis for co-housing is people don't generally know each other before they get involved in a community, but what we share is the idea that we can get more together, we can do more together, we can create a better place to live for myself individually by working with my neighbors. So that's what brings us together. I think people are often confused that you do co-housing with your friends. I have a lot of great friends that go way back. I'd still be waiting to live in co-housing if I was counting on them to do it. So in most of these cases, it's people who come together around the idea of creating a neighborhood. And so this is my common house in Nevada City co-housing. This was after a Friday night dinner. So we had dinner. You can see there's a group sitting around drinking wine and chatting. In the back corner, they're putting a puzzle together. There's some other people playing pool. Oh, and the new baby coming in. That baby's about to be passed around to everybody in the community because we love babies. So this idea, that's what the common house allows, is a place to bring together, to come together. I don't have to clean up my house to invite you over, a real luxury. But with co-housing, unlike co-living, co-housing, you have, the definition of co-housing is you have your own house. It could be a small studio, it could be a large 4-bedroom, or anything in between. It could be a standalone single-family house, or as you'll see later in this presentation, an urban condominium. And so that allows, for me, what it allows is the ability to live in a community over the long term, because I can define, when I want to jump into the community activities, when I need my own space. So there's a lot of flexibility within that, which I think works well for many Americans in a way that co-living is often harder for us. But I think I actually just really believe in community in any way you can create a community by proximity. I think that really makes day-to-day life so much more practical and fun. So the definition of co-housing as one type of community is that the future residents are involved in the development and the design. They don't have to do it themselves. They typically hire qualified professionals. I worked as a developer partner in co-housing groups, and now work as a development consultant partnering with co-housing groups. And that we're really looking at a design that encourages community as well as protecting privacy, more of a balance there. That you have common facilities in addition to private homes, but they are complete private homes. And then it makes sense that the residents manage the community afterwards. And it's not a cult. There's no guru, there's no leader, so we really depend on non-hierarchical decision-making, one form or another of consensus building. But in most cases, most co-housing communities end up as a homeowners association. I can get Fannie Mae loans, Freddie Mac loans. I can meet the Department of Real Estate's requirements, so that we fit within that larger sort of mortgage world in what Americans expect when they buy a house and such. So what drives me, what got me into this and what I fell in love with, I mean, on one hand, on a very personal level, I think living in co-housing is great. And I have now lived in co-housing, first as a young working mom, then as the mother of a teenager, then as an empty nester, now as the older single woman. And in every different phase of my life, it's really benefited me. But what keeps me going professionally is I'm really been looking for, how does America use less resources? because if the rest of the world thinks that we are the model they're striving to be like, this world's dead and we have no chance with climate change. So what I saw as a young architect coming out of UC Berkeley was that we needed market rate models that were attractive. And when I saw co-housing, I saw that people who could afford and choose a single family house chose a community. And I didn't think I was the only one looking for something like that. And so, thus, we have now created a lot of co-housing across the United States. There's about 180 existing co-housing communities all across the United States now. There are also ever increasing number of communities in Canada, in England, throughout Europe, in Japan, in Korea. And so, this is a model that is definitely being taken up all over the world. The focus of my work is really North America. So Marty is the founder of Fair Oaks EcoVillage, and I worked with her and the community as a development consultant. They moved in during the pandemic, the early stages of the pandemic. It's been a real challenging time for building housing through the pandemic, but you can see here, this is a good example of, right, and so in their main area, all the native plants being core to their landscaping. Look at that gorgeous lupin. But again, as with all co-housing communities, you have private homes. So this is one of the smaller flats, an upstairs flat. All of the homes have large outdoor porches, which I think in our California climate, everybody should have a porch. I actually think a lot of issues in America would be solved if everybody had a really great porch that was big enough to really sit in and bring you out in front of your house. But in addition to that, this is a picture from their common house where it was actually from a time when I went down. My niece was renting there for a while and we made common dinner. So they have, a full common house with a great room, kitchen area, crafts rooms, and guest rooms, as most co-housing communities do. Here's just a site plan for the Fair Oaks project. It is just under 4 acres, and it was a funny flag lot, right? And so the way it's laid out is your only street access is here on New York Avenue. And so we come in there, that's sort of a driveway, and a lot of the parking and garages is focused there. So in many other communities, you'll see there's much more of a front-facing community. The nature of this site as a flag lot made that a little difficult because the other road you're on is Fair Oaks Boulevard, and they're moving fast there. So there's only a fire exit out on Fair Oaks, no way to come in there. But anyway, you drive in, you park, and then you can see internally all of the homes face onto an internal courtyard. And here in the middle is the common house, along with a pool and a hot tub. So this is sort of the central community facilities where lots of things happen, everything from just a place for your guests to stay to community dinners, the kids' playroom, or a crafts night. And I think that's one of the core things that makes co-housing work is getting people out of their cars. Because when you actually live in a community, really community happens on the pathways. So by parking here and then walking in, you're much more likely to run into your neighbors. You can see here, there's a little sort of swale at the backside. So this is where they have now been planting the orchard, and there's community gardens as well. And the entire landscaping is very appropriate. It's actually enforced by the County of Sacramento these days, but as drought tolerant and very appropriate to our Mediterranean climate here. Seems like it. There. So we did the best we could do given the budgets we were dealing with, right? So we are always considering how does the light come in? How do we keep the heat out? The different times of year, Energy Star, throughout that. But I don't think that's the magic sauce for more environmental sustainability. And I'll talk more about that as we go. I think the secret sauce is really creating a community where people work together. And so, this is what actually really helps the long-term sustainability in terms of really using less resources overall. And Fair Oaks Eco Village definitely exists because of Marty. And I think for every one of these communities, and I'll show you some of the others in that area momentarily, it takes a burning soul or a couple of burning souls to get them off the ground because developers are not building these communities. So what I figured out early on in my career is the number one thing we had to be able to prove is we had real buyers who could really afford it, who to commit to a project from the earliest stages. And so that they are actually part of the design process, but more importantly, the funding process. So it is the future buyers that come together. And again, most of these people didn't know each other beforehand. But they're putting up the money to build, to get the designs done, to take it through the planning approval process, to get it to the start of construction where you can get a construction loan. And we need, in order to get a construction loan, we need to be able to prove we've got real buyers. So this is absolutely critical. And it was Marty's persistence and stubbornness that really got this project off the ground, and her willingness, not as a real estate developer, but becoming a real estate developer, it turns out, to put up that first money to tie up the site while we organized a group around it. So, but co-housing actually isn't new to California. We are the home in Davis, California is one of the very first communities to be built as a co-housing community. Muir Commons, you can see how bare it was when they moved in and how rich it is today. This is Southside Park down at 5th and T. And again, they moved in 1993. And here, this is actually on the street front with the parking, and it blends in so well to the larger neighborhood that people don't even realize it's a co-housing community there. But they have a wonderful outdoor space in the backside. So you can see here, right, that's the common house there, and then this inner courtyard, which really creates that community space for kids to play and people to hang out. And I think one of the things that I'm really proud of with co-housing is communities like this that began to attract people back to the inner city of Sacramento. When they moved in 1993, there was no new construction happening downtown whatsoever. And people were willing to leave single-family homes in the suburbs to live downtown because of the community there. And it is actually a great place to raise kids right there in the heart of the city. This is Wolf Creek Lodge up in Grass Valley. It's one of the projects I developed. It's more oriented for aging in place. So again, we have a mixture here of intergenerational communities as well as communities that are really designed for aging in place. A significant portion of the co-housing market is definitely baby boomers. And the most recent one, Washington Commons in West Sacramento, just finished construction. We had the grand opening in June. So people have moved in, and one of the things I love about this property is it's a really urban solution. So it's half an acre, 4 stories, a block off the river. So you can hit all of those trails. You can walk over to Amtrak, walk to the farmer's market, downtown farmer's market. And so for many people, that was really a big draw in addition to the community, was the ability to live with either very low use of your car, or you could actually live in this community with no car at all. Seems like it gets sticky. There. So this is one of the homes there. You can see a very contemporary look. Got to change with the times on the look there. But and there's just a couple of units left for sale there, but it's 35 homes, and everybody's moved in now. With each of these communities, every single one, every single year, we are always balancing a variety of different things. People come together because they're looking for something that is not they can't find out there otherwise, and that's the community, right? So a community where you actually really do you know your neighbors, where people want to collaborate, whether it's about the gardens or solar panels or just helping out each other. So that is the core of a co-housing community. But there's a very strong interest in sustainability and long-term sustainability. And how do we do that? How do we use less resources? The difficulty is we are always bumping up against affordability. None of these communities have any subsidy. So they've got to compete in a market rate environment. And for any of you who have been looking at the housing market recently, it's pretty awful out there. Prices went up 40% during the pandemic. They're not coming down because the cost to build went up that much. So, it's that balancing act. So every community would like to be as sustainable as possible. But the challenge is, what can we afford when we actually go to bid? What are the interest rates? What is the balance? So with co-housing communities, we are both looking at what do we build initially and how do we adapt over the long term? So we are always looking at, how can we push the limits? What's interesting to me is the things that were really pushing the limits when I first started are now California code. California is really at the forefront of, requiring that buildings are built in a very energy efficient way. Obviously, the more attached walls you have, that really helps a lot. And the new communities like Washington Commons are all electric. So we're getting rid of gas altogether. So you can start to see the evolution over time. And I think what that really points out is that whatever you build today is the best you could do today. And in 5 years, the buildings will not be the latest, right? But that's where we look at how do we adapt over time. So these days, you're required in new housing to put solar panels on. I have to say, I have really mixed feelings about that. I know every co-housing community wants solar panels. A lot of times the community added them later because it adds about $10,000 per unit to the upfront cost when upfront costs are already so much. So, and I think co-housing communities are unique in how they evolve over time. We're looking at things like how do you get the daylight in deep into the house, which is where do you put the windows so you can see how this window is going up to the ceiling. We don't have a header, we're using the rim joist as a header to get light deeper into the house. But I think just as importantly, maybe even more importantly, is getting people out of their cars, right? We live in a society where people are totally dependent on their cars. And, whether it is to go to the grocery shopping, to see your community, wherever your community is, take a hike, go to the gym, most Americans get in their car to do that. And I think one of the great things we really see with co-housing communities is people much less dependent on their cars. Clearly, that first starts with where are you building, right? So the Fair Oaks community is on the bike paths of the American River. So that gets you up and down that river for miles and miles and miles. But I think just as importantly is what happens within the community. So one, is there a culture of, hey, can you get there by bike? Just seeing other people using bikes, traveling on bike encourages other people to do it. But then there's the little things. Like I cannot imagine a co-houser getting in the car to drive to the supermarket for an onion. That would be just a really ridiculous use of time when you could just go next door. And if they don't have an onion, I bet you could get one at the house after that. In fact, my community has a shortcut in our email thread. So we have a community email, most communities do. ISO stands for in search of. Just last night, I needed a coffee grinder. So I sent out an email and said, I need a coffee grinder. Ideally, I could have it for a week because my sister gave me these beans I'd like to use. Not only did I get at least 5 offers for coffee grinders within 10 minutes, but not one, but 2 were delivered to my doorstep. No need to buy it, find it, drive to a friend's to buy it. Another way we really reduce car trips is play dates. I mean, I think one of the things, the haunts of modern life for parents is driving your children to play dates. I really think that was like, I don't know what God had against mothers to give us that. But that will happen a lot less when you've got kids nearby, right? So the kids, you can do the old-fashioned thing of, just get out of here. Dinner's at 6. Find somebody to play with out there in the neighborhood. And that neighborhood feels very safe and comfortable. So there's a lot less driving across town to find what is, our community. Because realistically, we all have a community. We're mostly social beings. We just drive to it. So for me, I know having that community next door doesn't replace my long-term friends, my extended family, which I have a big one, but it makes a huge difference in my day-to-day life. Just knowing and working with the people next door. The other thing when we think about sustainability is the amount of shared amenities and resources. And that shows up in all sorts of different ways. So this picture here, this guy runs the technology for University of Arizona. He also lives in a co-housing community there. So for him, it was really easy to set up an internal fast internet system. So my own community has a similar system where we have a server, several fast internet lines come into that server, go out to everybody in the community, so we're not tied to Comcast. I actually have some of the fastest, most reliable internet in the county for about $10 a month. We also have a pool, as does Fair Oaks. So a pool seems like such a luxury. I can't imagine paying for it and maintaining it for myself. But it's so nice to have. It's so great. I swim a lot more. I'm healthier. I use it regularly because I share it with 34 other families. We have here the lawnmower. Why would 34 families have more than one lawnmower? That seems really silly. Yeah, we just have one. So in all these different levels, the ability to share with your neighbors and take advantage of working together, you have to buy a lot less stuff. You get access to a lot more, like the crafts room here or a workshop, that you don't have to have and maintain yourself. But ultimately, I think the most important thing that we do in these communities is to create the place for an ongoing conversation. So this is the community dinner. We have community dinners in my community 3 or 4 times a week. You don't have to participate, but they're really great and excellent food. And sitting around the table together, breaking bread, as people have done for millennium, is where we where we build our ties, where we get to know each other, but also where we talk about new ideas. So it was at a community dinner that we started talking about how are we going to get EV chargers? Because my community, Nevada City Co-Housing, we moved in 18 years ago. We didn't have EV chargers. So a couple of the people in the community got organized, saw there was some grant money, combination with our money, and organized to get us EV chargers. So we now have a setup that will meet our EV charging needs for quite a bit into the future. So I think it's that sort of looking at not just buildings, but the broader sense of how do we live a more resource sustainable life. And you can only do that in community. I think it's really hard to do it alone, and it's not very efficient. I'm an architect, right? I could think for years about oh God, I really should get around to getting those solar panels on my house. But by drawing on the expertise of my neighbors and the interest of my larger communities, we moved in with solar panels. So I think looking at it more holistically, not just buildings, but how do we create neighborhoods that are both more energy efficient, but also more resilient. Because I think, you know, we need to know how to work together to do that. And we certainly saw that during the pandemic. This is one of my neighbor meetings during the heart of the pandemic when we were all trying to figure out what did it mean, what were we supposed to be doing. And so it was really great to be part of a community that was going through that together. Like most communities, we had to shut down our common house, but we were still talking, you know, we were still organizing, we were trying, still taking care of each other and trying to figure out how to get through in the best way. And I think that's true for everything we're likely to face in the future, you know, whether that's forest fires, drought, you know, all the uncertainty of what is ahead of us. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be going through that alone. I'd much rather work with a group of people around me. It's not that any one of us knows what's the right thing, but is continues to look at these questions of how do we support each other and how do we live a more sustainable lifestyle? Because it's not set in stone, it's not a building code today, it's the long term. And I really feel like one of the most important lessons we're teaching in living in these communities is to our children, and that they too learn that you get a lot further up the tree when you collaborate. So with that, I'm sure I will open this up, and Marty and I would love to hear from you, what you're thinking and any questions you might have.
So you're opening up for questions, right?
Yeah, maybe do you want to add anything before we do that, Marty?
Well, I would like to point out, Virginia asked, what does that actually mean, cost to build? And I could answer it or you could answer it.
Go
But
for it.
that'd be a good one to start with. She
Mhm.
put it in the chat.
Yeah, go ahead, Marty.
Okay, so building cost has a lot of components. The sticks and bricks, people think of that, but you've got to get the land, you've got to get the approvals, which takes time and money. You have to hire people to help you with that. Katie's role is as a development consultant. So literally, she shepherded us and has shepherded many other communities through this whole process. We had to pay her, of course, so that's another cost. Um, and so it's way more than sticks and bricks. It's the land, it's the sticks and bricks, it's the design, the architectural costs, the planning costs, and the actual construction costs. It's all those things. So did I leave anything out? Would you add anything?
Well, I think people are often, so one of the things I do is very early on start running those first budgets. You know, what is it really going to cost to build this community? And I think people who are not involved in housing development, I mean, I'm shocked every day. And I'm shocked at how much it has gone up since 2019. People want to blame the developers. I can tell you it is a really tough business building housing, and it is very, very cost sensitive. And so it's a big issue in America today. So
So Logan is asking the process, application procedure for new residents. Each property is owned individually. How does that work? In other words, what kind of governance exists? Feel free to jump in, Logan.
Okay, you want me to
Marty.
try that, Katie, or you want to do it?
either way,
Okay, I'll tackle it. Basically, your home is owned individually, from the walls inside, and you're in a condominium. Most of us are in homeowner association, HOAs, and so the community owns everything outside your walls, and you have basically a share of the common. And so that's pretty much how I think most of them work.
yeah, let me just say a little bit more about that. Co-housing could be done anyway, right? It could be a co-op, it could be a rental. But in the United States, financing a co-op is very, very difficult. In California, unless you have subsidies, it's almost impossible. And so as I was starting to do the first communities, I was looking at, and one of the things we really learned from Denmark is like, how are Americans buying homes? Let's see if we can fit into that system, because everything you do that is different makes it harder. And so a big part of my career has been actually really making co-housing fits into the American home mortgage system. I can qualify for any more, you can get a VETS loan, anything. Once we get it built, the question is getting it built. And so all the communities here that you saw are condominiums. When I started, I thought everybody'd be building condominiums now, but in California, we actually really discourage those. That's a whole nother story. Um, but in Europe, you'll see that most new housing is actually built as low-rise condominiums. So it's definitely the most energy efficient, sustainable, and walkable neighborhoods to build.
Isn't there kind of a movement towards, like, if you go to Europe, you're going to see closer to downtown 4 or 5 story, almost the roofs are practically 4 or 5 stories coming from the downtown, and in America it's just single family housing. And isn't there kind of a movement towards going a little bit more, having more volume to that more
Yep.
of efficiency, kind of moving in this kind of direction, basically?
Well, no. So in California, in particular in the United States, we have liability issues that really shut down developers doing that. So what you will generally see is most of your larger buildings are rentals, and they are
Yep.
now built by large development companies. And most of your for sale product is actually single family homes. And there is way too little in between.
Yep.
And if there was one thing that I would really encourage California to tackle, because is to be able to build, particularly smaller condominium developments, is great infill, because really that's the way we should be building today. And it would make it much more affordable for, people at all ages.
So Rebecca is asking, do you think you can turn an existing neighborhood into a co-housing community? How do you
Uh,
develop the right community culture?
Yeah, we can answer that. And also I'll go to the question before that that's been on there for a while. But we'll start with Rebecca's question. They did that in Davis, and they have a community that literally was existing rental homes. Now, the homes were small and they were close to each other, and they faced each other on the backyards. So it was ideal. You can't always find something like that. And I'm blanking on the name of the community, but Katie can probably remember. It's in Davis,
It's
and
called
it's
N Street, N Street
N
Commons.
Street Co-housing.
Right.
And I visited there, and works very, very well. And then later, they took one of the homes and made themselves a common house and enlarged it a little bit. So,
Right.
um,
If I
so
could add to that, I think the difficulty with existing neighborhoods is they're designed for privacy. And so you're
right.
kind of fighting the design. So I think you should try to create community wherever you can, right? And if you're like your neighborhood, could you start a dinner club to get people, together once a month? Share the contact information, start building those relationships,
Mhm.
because out of that will come more than you could ever imagine. I had neighbors that moved from Nevada City Co-housing up to Bellingham, and all they did was hold a neighborhood dinner. And before you know it, they were borrowing each other's e-bikes to go on rides, right? So, you know, you can start with that. Unfortunately, the design doesn't necessarily help you. You're kind of
Right.
fighting the design. But yeah, I think with the intent, I think there's a lot that can be learned from co-housing and taken out into existing neighborhoods. The N Street community is sort of another approach where over time people moved into the neighborhood that were interested in the community. So it was less converting existing people who live there already. So,
I feel lucky to be in a cul-de-sac in Sacramento, where we just exactly that. We have 4th of July. We shoot up the fireworks and have a potluck every 4th of July, and then my wife and I host a holiday party. So we just had that, and we love just getting to know our neighbors better. And I think literally on Christmas Day, we have this email or a text chain, and somebody asked for heavy whipping cream or something, and like, yes, but everybody jumped in and to volunteer, and it is so rare, I think, to find that in any kind of situation. And I think, at least in Sac County, I think they've been trying to get away from even doing cul-de-sacs because ambulances can't get through or something.
Right.
It's all about not about us. It's all about that kind of stuff. So yeah, there's so much that has to go into just the infrastructure, and here you are doing it on purpose and making it work. If people are even just aware of it. But I also want to go back, Marty. I've reread your history of how you got to be in Fair Oaks, and I know you started also in Orangevale and Folsom trying to get developments going there, and you had neighborhood opposition. I'm wondering if that opposition was co-housing specific, or was it just general, not in my backyard kind of NIMBYism?
Well, basically, neighbors don't really want any development next door. They
Yeah,
love having that empty lot right next to them. But if somebody buys that lot, they certainly don't want any more density than they have. So if, for example, they're 6 homes per acre, they don't want you to build with any more density. Well, to make co-housing work, you need more density. And so it seems like you're just always up against neighborhood. We did outreach. We went door to door and we talked to all of the neighbors. And in our case, our project was zoned, the property we bought in Fair Oaks was zoned properly. So we did not need a zoning change. If you need
yeah,
a zoning change, I can guarantee you you're in for trouble, because when we had needed a zoning change in Orangevale, we had at the little planning CPAC that hardly anybody ever shows up to, we had 100 people show up and they were opposed to our project and they were vocal. And the
yeah.
poor people in our group were kind of in tears because they didn't expect this. But
CPAC being the Community Planning Advisory
yeah,
Council. I'm a
Right.
member of. I've been on a CPAC for
right.
18 years now. Uh,
I do want to say, I think it was Marty that actually reached. So, Marty, wasn't it you when you reached out to some existing communities when you were in that process? And we got the most amazing letters from
Or
neighbors.
letters of support. Yes,
Yep.
Yeah,
that can
from
help.
neighbors of
Yes.
co-housing communities who that's literally said, "Oh, I was totally against it. I was so worried when they built, but now they're good friends, and my daughter had her reception to her wedding in their common house, and we're so glad they're here." And so
Right.
it really is a fear of the unknown, the fear of change. I do say, I mean, California has made some significant changes in that in code, thanks to Gavin Newsom really tackling some of the housing issues. So it is one of the things that has actually gotten easier, but pretty much the only thing that's gotten easier.
I
But
wonder if one of the
can I add
hacks.
to
Go
that?
ahead. Go ahead.
Because the NIMBY, not in my backyard, one person who was on the planning commission, she said, actually, it's banana. And banana stands for build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. And really, I think that is what neighbors feel. If they have an empty yard, empty lot next to them, they like it. And I remember saying to one of my
Sure.
neighbors who was opposing it before we were built in Fair Oaks, I said, well, you can buy it. And she said, oh, I can't do that, and so,
Well, and we wonder why there's a loneliness epidemic, right? So there's two,
Right.
now we have the actual real studies that are showing that Americans aren't happy. And I just read a new article that one of the things that they now have, data on is the more you drive, the less happy you are. And
Right.
so, it's very convenient for us to have our cars, but if you're dependent on it for everything you do, it actually leads to less happiness.
and we actually, of our 30 homes, we have 2 households that do not have a car. One of them is a husband and wife with a kid, and they have bikes, good bikes. And the other one is a single woman, but they do not own a car, and they don't mind not owning a car. There's another question from Logan. I want to answer that. Process application for new residents, is each property owned individually? Yes, each home is owned individually. And when you need to sell, you list that with a realtor, or if you want, you can just list it on your own and not find a realtor. But in our case, we have used realtors. And then also a question about governance. We basically have a consensus decision-making with a voting fallback, which means that we bring something up, we discuss it. If somebody absolutely cannot live with it, they just feel like it's really bad for the community, not just that they don't like the color red, then we can take it back to the community for a vote, a voting override. And if 75% of the people want it, then it passes anyway. So that's very effective because it keeps people from doing idle blocks.
Yeah,
That's a high bar. Seems like 75% compared to
well, and I think
60.
that's what we've really found is really bringing people along. People have this fear of group process,
Yeah,
and condos, HOA boards are like a kiss of
right.
death, right? But actually, it's just actually learning how to work together. And I would think that's one of the things that co-housing has done really well is really pay attention to process, learn how to delegate out to committees, how do you actually build consensus so you have full support. And what's really exciting to me is you wouldn't believe the number of people have told me, what I learned living in community, I take to my workplace. It changed how I
Yeah,
work in my family. I mean, these go out. I mean, my daughter, growing up in co-housing, she can walk into any room and get you organized and on agenda in about 5 minutes.
I was just thinking, you probably some member of your community, if they're like a handyman, they'd be like the hero of the day. But
Oh,
also
yes.
when you're having to work together so much, having a therapist slash social worker slash, somebody who can actually get people to listen and communicate better, that they're the hero. It just takes every kind of
Yeah, and
skill.
you get to draw on all that
Yeah,
expertise, which is
yeah.
so
Yeah, we learned pretty quickly who to call. There's another question. How are these communities affected by RTO
Re-
mandates? I'm not sure
return
what.
to the office.
Oh,
Oh,
return to the
So
office.
Rabbit, feel free to jump in. And what do you mean by that exactly?
Yeah, I get it. Because I don't think it's really affected us. We moved in during the pandemic, and so some
Yeah,
people were working at home, and some people were already retired. But of those people, they just were able to work it out with their employer. And I don't think they had different rules, but and there are people that now go into an office and it's okay. So I don't know.
but I think
Good
the other
question.
side of that, if I could, so I have seen from the very first co-housing communities 30 years ago, always had a pretty high percentage of people that would work part-time or full-time from home. And the problem with working from home is that we often rely on our workplaces for our social connections. So the work from home has a lot of benefits and it also is really isolating. And so one of the things I've seen in co-housing is over time is that it's a way that you could work from home and have social connection there.
Right,
There are
definitely.
some communities that have a, mid-morning coffee hour in the common house for everybody who's working at home to come down and have coffee together. So, you can, again, I think it actually, I mean, what I've seen during the pandemic, it certainly opened up where people could live. There was a lot of moving around. So sites that were further out now are greater viability if people can do long-term work from home. But I also
Lauren has
think
a
just
yep.
having that social connection in your neighborhood again makes it a healthier option to work from home. And, it's like, who's got a printer? I need a quiet space for a little, can I go, I'm going to take the yoga room in the common house this hour.
And I'm kind of curious, Marty, your experience. You don't exactly have your neighbors just walking in. You don't have that kind of. They're not going to bug you or anything.
Oh, they would
You're
knock on our
yeah,
door.
yeah,
They bring our
not
doorbell.
that kind of
No.
craziness.
We don't lock our house. I mean, they could open the door, but
Yep.
we don't do that, do we? I see there's a question
Yeah.
from Lauren Chumney. All the other questions have been put in the chat, but
Feel
Lauren
free.
raised their hand.
Go ahead, Lauren.
Yeah, thanks so much. This has been super interesting.
It's kind of hard to hear you, Lauren.
Oh, can you hear me?
You're a little muffled.
Maybe she could put it in the chat.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, if
Forget.
you can hear me, I'll put it in the chat.
Sorry about that.
I think the thing, you know, I hope that I was able to show you through the various examples is community can be done at any density, right? So I am actually currently working on an agri-village north of Seattle where we're saving 240 acres by building 2 closely clustered villages. So of the 240 acres, over 200 will remain as farm and open space by clustering. And we rejected the rural cluster code they had because it wasn't very clustering. And so whether, you know, whether it's big open space you're trying to save by building the old-fashioned way, a village, or whether it's 4 stories in West Sacramento, or a townhouse like Fair Oaks Eco Village, you can do community at all of that. It's not about a particular building type. I do think that we need higher densities generally if we're going to use less cars, less stuff, less fuel, and actually have a sense of community. But to me, that's one of the things that I think is really interesting about this is the number of different ways you can do it.
I feel like from the planning perspective, like I've been on a CPAC for years, we see developers trying to get more dense development, and it's all in how it's done. If it's just, you know, no landscaping, just plop down and nothing like this kind of community, that's not the best kind of density. Whereas, you know, so it's almost like it's a give and take of you want, in your case, Marty, you wanted ideally to just have it rezoned before you even came there so that before you had to say, here's, lay it all out and say, here's what co-housing is and this is what we want in your community, as opposed to just have them rezone it and then you don't even have to go through the whole process as much.
We could dream on.
Well, you still have to go through the process. We didn't
Yeah.
need zoning change, but you still have to go through the CPAC, the
Oh.
local planning commission. You still have to go to the planning commission. We didn't have to go to the board of supervisors. So that
Okay.
one less.
Right. But I think, Marty, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing that the overwhelming percentage of your neighbors, the buyers of Fair Oaks EcoHousing, moved from single family homes. They could afford single family homes. It wasn't like, oh, I can't afford a single family home,
Yes.
so I have to buy a townhouse. They chose
Right.
a higher density townhouse development because it gave them more, not because it gave them less.
Yeah.
Yes.
We have to, but you know, to what you were saying there, Burke, is that we need to make higher densities attractive, and that there to be a benefit, not just as like, oh, I can't afford it, you know. So, and that's one of the things I really see with co-housing.
So let me read Lauren's comment. I came to one of the initial meetings for the Fair Oaks community 8 years ago. Wow. When I was expecting my first kid and I loved the idea of having a community for my new family. We couldn't swing the initial cost at the time though, so we didn't proceed. I'm curious now that the infrastructure is in place and it's possible to get a traditional mortgage. Are more families with kids coming into the community? When we were looking, there were few to no younger families. Thanks. Yeah.
Sure, and I'll answer that. And before I forget, if you go to our website, it's fairoaksecohousing.org, and you'll see the story of Fair Oaks Eco Housing, and I wrote that, and it tells the story. It was a 15-year journey, so it's pretty interesting if you want to learn about it. But Lauren came to one of our initial meetings when she was expecting her first kid. And at the time, she wondered, you know, because at the time we didn't have any little kids. Well, we knew it was really important to have kids. So there was one family that really wanted it, and they had one little kid and another one that was a baby. And we liked them a lot. And they were actually a Waldorf family, and we're near the Waldorf school. So a couple of us stepped forward and literally helped them buy their home. And we're co-owners of that home with them. So we got those 2 kids in our community, and now we have 6 kids. So if you could just get 1 or 2, you can get more because you can attract more. And now we don't have any problems
And,
attracting.
and I can speak to having raised a kid in co-housing. I don't know how everybody else does it. If they're really, it's so great
Takes
to
a village.
have not only other kids, people get really focused on their other kids to play with, and that's great.
Yeah.
But being surrounded in a neighborhood with people who know your kid and care about your kid is amazing. And so as also, people like Marty or Marty's husband's really quite the bird watcher. So anytime, want to learn about birds, anybody, another community, it was one of the elders who taught, like, if you wanted to and you learned how to use the stuff in the workshop, George would teach you how to make a skateboard.
Oh, wow.
Right? So the ability to have all these role models it's a fabulous way to raise.
And I will tell you that one family that we worked so hard to get in the community, they tell us that it's the best place they've ever lived. And it really
Right.
feels good to hear that.
It's funny, there was a study that just came out saying every Coke that you drink takes 12 minutes off your life. Every hot dog is like 36 minutes off. And this, having
This
community
adds to your
adds
life.
7 years to your life or whatever it is. Like,
I
why
figured,
take,
I could actually, I don't, but I could smoke a pack a day to offset my community life.
right?
Yeah, no,
Well,
it's true. And we've seen those. Now they have the studies to really show that that's actually really true.
so in the last minute we have or so, Marty, because it's eco housing at Fair Oaks, your utility bills are lower. Do you have an idea of how much lower they are now compared to what they used to be?
Oh my goodness, mine are like a quarter of what they
Oh.
used to be. But part of that is because the building standard was so excellent. We also have attached walls. We have an in unit, but we have, on one side, we have attached walls. And we're also 2-story, which is more efficient than a spread out 1-story. But I can't believe how low our energy bills are, and I'm profoundly grateful. And we're not
So-
all electric. We're electric and gas with gas stove and gas water heater. But if we were doing it today, we would do it all electric.
Yeah. And I think the HOA might be slightly higher, but then it's a different kind of model where you all have to break bread and share.
And
and
what I've seen, if you
35%.
actually do a comparison, which I did, I
Yeah.
compared my HOA dues to owning a single family house in my neighborhood. And the actual cost, you just have to look at the real cost.
Yeah.
My costs are about a third of owning a single family house on my neighborhood.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's
Yeah,
definitely.
the maintenance costs are way less.
Oh, right. Not having,
Right.
everybody having a lawnmower, all that.
I do want to make sure people know, so you can find Fair Oaks Eco Village and the directory for co-housing communities all across the US at the Co-housing Association website, which is cohousing.org. So there's a directory there for both forming and existing communities and homes for sale within communities. And so that's really the #1 resource to find out if something's going on where you might want to consider living.
Well, thank you both for coming. This is such an interesting topic to me, and I hope it's been interesting to everybody here. And great to see everybody joining us. So, Marty and Katie, thank you so much. This has really been interesting. I'd love to check out your community myself, and hope others would also like to see it. So
That'd be great. And I put our website, fairoaksecohousing.org,
Very good.
and in the chat. So if anybody wants to
Right, and
find
we
out.
usually have a national co-housing open house day in the spring in April and May, so look for that. Because communities like Fair Oaks and my community in Nevada City will open the doors to just come and see what it's, what we got, and, no
Right.
pressure, just to share it, so.
Yeah,
Our
we've done
local
it every
planners should
year.
go.
So,
The local board of supervisors and planning commission members should they should be required to go to that kind of things before they weigh in on this kind of stuff. So yeah,
Yeah,
love it.
right.
All right.
Thanks
Well,
so
thanks
much for
again.
having us.
You bet.
thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.